Hajj was undertaken on a shoestring budget. 2 of them was as an agent provocateur, 3 as a reporter, and the remaining as a guest of a custodian of the holy places. His experience includes sharing meals with poor Uzbekistani pilgrims, learning jihadi politics from Afghanis, learning of life under the Islamic Republic of Iran, the complexities of polygamy from West Africans, and the challenge of forgiveness from those from the Balkan states. Besides being blessed with the opportunities of making so many visits to the holy place, Fuaad has also been lucky to get the opportunity to clean the inside of the Kaaba. He is also the only British Muslim to have done all of the 7 tawafs on a helicopter. I don't know about you, but I'm really looking forward to hearing about all of this. So please go ahead.
اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد ومن والاه. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
The invitation to come and speak tonight came, I think, less than 48 hours, but I jumped at it. Why? Because I feel quite confident after being to the holy places for 12 months, or 12 times, sorry. I suffer, and anybody who's been to Hajj, or even Umrah will tell you, particularly Hajj, that if you've been once, every Arafah after that becomes a very painful exercise if you're not in Arafah, because it provokes this very powerful memories of being in Jabal Rahman, the Hill of Mercy. Where do I start? Growing up in a traditional Muslim society, you get trained, particularly in the Arkan, the pillars. You are taught about prayers, but you pray at the same time. You are taught about fasting, and you continue fasting. You know about zakah, though you don't pay zakah, but you see it being operated around. It is Hajj. Everybody wants to Hajj, you want to prepare for the day that you go for Hajj. It's for some very strange reason, right from very young, I just wanted to go for Hajj. I was obsessed about it actually. At about 12 years old, I tried to memorize all the supplications that you need to do for each of the tawaf, all the extra things, and very much. When I was about 19, I think, I won a scholarship to study Arabic and Islamic civilization in Khartoum, of all places. When I was in Khartoum, when I just finished my course, it was Hajj season. And a family friend of ours, just jokingly said, "Why did you go for Hajj? It's just across," because in Sudan, from Khartoum, they go on the boat. And it's relatively quite cheap. You don't have to pay airfare. You just pay about, I think at the time it was about $7 or something like that. So anyway, he said, "If you want, I can get you a visa." The visa was got, and subhanallah, I was on the boat with about 200 other people for a boat that was made for like 50 people in the size of the thing, and we were going for Hajj. We arrived at Jeddah airport at the time when Jeddah airport was really very primitive, so to speak. I can easily pass as a Sudanese if I want to. I also had the accent of a Sudanese when I was speaking Arabic at the time. We landed, we were put in the sun for a couple of hours, and then we were allowed to move. Most of the people I was with were as poor as I was a student. I landed there with, I think I had $100, which was like a lot of money, but it wasn't enough to cover the whole season. Well, like I said, I've done many other Hajj, but this is the one that I remember the most because it was my first, but also it was the one that I really paid for. The rest were, most of them, freebies, with the exception of one or two. So we walked. At the time, the controversy was not about selfies in Hajj. The controversy was about buses which should have the roofs on the top of them or not. If you remember those yellow, some clever bugger, I'm sorry, worked out to buy these American school buses, you know those yellow buses, we don't have them here, and took up the roof, and then we all there were, but they costed a lot of money. And then people were such that there were not many of them. So priority was given to elderly people, disabled people, and children. And the rest of us who were young and stuff, we actually enjoyed it, we kept walking. So we basically walked. Whenever we got tired, we jumped into the bus, somebody would sit walking. The bus was going so slow that you can actually keep it up, but it would stop ahead, and then when they stopped they were driven, I was with the Sudanese people. Sudanese, I lived in Sudan. Sudanese are the masters of taking tea breaks. They have a tea break in a tea break. So any Sudanese here will know what I'm talking about, or if anybody. The thing that I remember at the time was very hot. There were no air conditions. The land was flat. When I landed in Mecca, I was taken to one of these Sayyid. He's a great-grandson of Rabia Malik Jilani. I was given his name. Omar, he was called. I went to see him, and he looked after us in his compound. After, Mikati, we walked there, we did a tawaf, then we went to his house, looked after us, and then next day he took us on a tour of Mecca as it was there. I'm talking about 1979. Did I say how old I was? So we went to visit the house of, Sayyidat Khadija, what they talk about where the toilets have been built now. We went to St. Omar's house, we went to visit a lot of the places. Mahalla then the graveyard was visited by people and stuff. And for me, because I learned before a bit, going there was like seeing the 3D kind of thing on a situation. But right in the middle of it, unbeknown to us, was this kubris, these big bridges which were going to bring the roads were being half built at the time. Actually, we liked them because the shadow they kept is a place where you could sit down and rest. There were issues in the first Hajj. Now, I don't know how the debate is going to go and what the people want. I've got only 5 minutes. At the time, the issue of toilet. Hajj is a big thing. Today, it costs, they tell me, about $5,000 to $6,000 to go. At the time, costed even more. It's normal. I met people who had to save for 25 years to go for Hajj. Most of the Muslims in the world today, their income is less than $150 a year. So for $5,000 is a lot of money for them. And those who make it there, there's only one reason. It's Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik. It's Allah calls. You don't go there because you're rich or because you can afford it or because... So it's a miracle. Every individual who's there is a miracle. But the issue is, when they go there, it becomes also an issue of extremism and overindulgence. It only makes sense where there's a problem of shortage of water at the time, or toilets, or other facilities that you restrain yourself. But it's a place where, you can't pass 100 yards before people call you to have roast meat and biryani and all this. Of course, you eat, you want to go and do something else with the food, isn't it? And some of these people who come from different parts of the world master the art of squatting and doing it silently, and you don't even notice it. And then you come with, next day with your wudu, and you have to, it's like walking in a minefield in Bosnia, Those are the issues, the challenges about that. But the beauty also to put about that Hajj, which I remember, is the meeting of the people. Is when after you pray, you come out, people stop you and tell you, come and join them. And you could meet hundreds of course, there are no visiting cards. You met somebody once in a lifetime, and you're never going to meet him again. And that was the issue. The most romantic thing I met was a couple from Indonesia who decided to get married during the Hajj season, or just after the Hajj season. And the beauty about it, they decided to get married, and the mahar was a glass of Zamzam water, which was free then. I wish I'd done it at the time, because later on it became quite inflationary, this mahar thing. But it's a place of experience, a place of sharing. Now, I since then have written and read a lot about the Hajj. The Hajj was the throbbing soul of the Muslim world. It's a place, when I went, there still you could buy carpets, you could buy things, ceramics and things people brought from the Muslim world. It was also a time to share. There was not so much politics, but we shared the dhikrs, adhkars. We shared, you know, in the evening people would sit around the fireplace and do dhikr and stuff like that. And I think now in the new Hajj, which the last one I went 2 years ago, but it was a different circumstance, is different. One of the indications of a failed civilization is when people consume what they don't produce. Nothing in Mecca is produced by, you know, even the thawb, even the hiram is imported from China. The tasbih must come from Sabi. The containers for the Zamzam water, which is disgusting because they use a lot of these plastic jerry cans and things like that, just destroy that. You talk about the destruction of the environment and things. I am one of those persons, and if we are to go into, I can talk more because I've been given the chairwoman here. It seems like a very formidable force, and I don't want the waters put over my neck. But the whole issue about the argument is, brothers and sisters, I know the argument is about the big ugly clock which is in Mecca, which is really like destructing stuff, and the other kind of physicalities. But somebody brought something very interesting, that all that is around the Kaaba is just reflecting the reality. That's the reality of the world we live in. But so long as the black stone is there and it's intact, and we should say Alhamdulillah is still there, because I don't know how long it will last, to be honest. I've had debates about questions, ulama being asked about doing virtual reality. If one can stimulate that kind of thing, can one do it? People like the late Gaddafi used to say, why don't you just make a stone here and go around it and do things like that sort of here. So the debate about it is, there's also an issue with the Saudis, which I do, the organizers of the Hajj, which I do respect, that the numbers of Hajj has come down from 60,000 50, 60 years ago to about 5 million or whatever figures nobody really knows. It's a high risk. For the doctors will tell you, if Naudbillah, something like Ebola or something comes there, people will die like flies. It's a miracle as it is, how it is. Now the issue is people come from totally different cultures and social structures. You get people in the villages who have, I remember when one of the visits they showed us the new toilets they opened, which is like modern toilets and things. The next day they took us there. And I have to say this because there is people, particularly from the subcontinent, who came to this toilet, and instead of sitting down, they were putting their legs on top of the toilet and basically squatting on top of it. And that the sense of hygiene is not treated, you know. And I think that a lot needs to be done before people go there to be prepared for them. I'm not a great fan of the Saudis, whatever it is, but I can tell you that they do put a lot of thinking into the situation. One of the things which I will go briefly to tell you what I was involved. About 15 years ago, a Norwegian company put in a proposal to do a train. And the train was from King Abdulaziz Airport to Mecca, to Medina, to Jeddah, back to the airport. And I was asked as a consultant to work on that, on this Muslim sensibilities. We worked on the project for 2 years. At the time, the estimation was $7.5 billion. Money was no problem. Muslims from across the world, governments, individuals, the Sultan of Brunei wanted to underwrite the whole of it. But it never took place. for two reasons. One, the king's son at the time felt that he wanted to take this up. But the issue was the awqaf in Mecca. The train had to go, and there was a big debate. How much under the ground is those people awqaf? At the time, this is the sensitivity, the foundations, how much they own. So if the train was to go down, how much they're going to be paid. But then somewhere along the line, new laws came in. Today, the whole Haram Sharif is destroyed. Those awqafs are finished. With few exceptions of few countries which go to their houses and stuff like that. What I want to say is, what is destroyed is not only the physical, but the soul of what that place was about. It might please for some people to know that one of the biggest awqaf or foundations which was found, people paid money, the money was to look after stray dogs in Mecca. This is how comprehensive. So once you arrive in Kaaba, you'll have bakeries which give you food, you'll have this kind of situation. Today, it is the most lucrative tourist business in the world. Mecca and Medina on its own has more tourists than any other tourist destination in the world. I'm not sure about the figures, but it goes into like 30 million or something like that. So the problem is there are sensitivities about the situation we need to discuss, and one of them is one of the conditions. Hajj is the only condition where Hajj al-Bayt man istata alayhi sabila. Hajj is obligatory, but only for those who can afford it. And this is where the issue comes. If you can't afford it, you're not. But now, when you go, some Medina, you wake up sometime, you'll think you're in Chicago or some of these North American cities. Your question is, what is a spirituality? I argue sometimes with people that we also got notions, we want nothing to change, because we Westerners, we want to go and have this nostalgic idea of the villages and we visit. But the people there, they want modernity, they want things. So somewhere a balance has to be reached. Unfortunately, that is not yet been achieved. Now, they're even destroying there, because why? They're looking at the statistics. They're saying in 10 years' time, there will be 10 million people going for Hajj. You need to look after them, Hajj. You cannot continue stopping them. So all these are discussions and things. I can go on and on, but I have to give others a chance. I was invited to go and clean the Kaaba, which is a rare and really profound opportunity. And I did that with a group of, at the time the group I went to contained quite a number of Western Muslims prominent. Yusuf Islam, this was among them, and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and a few others. It was a wonderful experience. The helicopter bit, if you want to know, I went as a journalist, and a photographer was taking the thing. So we were up in jet, the helicopter was going around, and we asked the pilot to take us 7 times, and we did tawaf. Thank you very much, and I welcome comments later, but if there's any. But others might have some more interesting things to say.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope actually that I look forward to learning more about your experiences in the question and answer session, inshallah. I have some of my own questions. I'd like to introduce next our second speaker, Dr. Rabia Malik. Rabia is an academic social psychologist and practicing systematic psychotherapist. She is co-head of the Marlborough Cultural Therapy Centre, a specialist therapeutic service for ethnic minority clients in London. She has extensive experience of working with Muslim clients' psychosocial problems and is especially interested in the interface between Islamic psychology and psychotherapy. Islamic spirituality, and psychotherapy. Rabia's doctoral research was on the cultural construction of depression amongst Pakistanis. Rabia was previously a senior lecturer in psychosocial studies at the University of East London, and she's also a freelance trainer and writer and has written several papers related to identity and mental health among Muslims, and has delivered tailored training and teaching to professionals on this subject. Rabia has held board positions with a number of community organisations, including Muslim Youth Helpline and here at City Circle. Thanks, Meg.
Thank you, Alia. In a way, that biography wasn't really necessary, because I think the only thing that's relevant to the talk today is having done the Hajj. And I thought I could only really speak about the Hajj in a personal capacity. And at first I thought, is it worth, talking about? Is that going to be interesting for anybody or not? And then I actually thought, well, actually, for each person who goes on the Hajj, it is an incredible journey. And it's only meaningful because of the people who go on the Hajj, really. And what I thought I would do is really reflect on some of my personal experiences leading up to it and going through it, and then to maybe just say something about the general situational context now, really. So I did the Hajj at a time in my life when it was really unexpected, because I had probably, like a lot of Pakistanis, grown up with the idea that you do the Hajj when you're old, right towards the end of your life, But my father passed away in 1998, and soon after that, we found ourselves in a situation where my mom said she wanted to go on Hajj because my father hadn't been able to do it before he died, and she realised it was important not to wait any longer. So my brother was going to go with her as her mahram and one of my sisters, and then the question came up about whether me and my other sister would want to go. And I was really, I was unsure. I thought, am I ready for this? I was 27 at the time, and I thought, am I ready for this? Am I really going to be able to partake in this seriously and wholeheartedly? And so I really went through a process of a bit of soul searching and asking people whether they'd recommend that I go on the Hajj at this time, or whether it's better to wait until you really feel, ready. And after some conversations and a dream which was quite significant, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And really that decision began something that has stayed with me for the rest of my life. It's one of the most important things I think that I've done. And I guess it started before we left in terms of the preparation. When you really start preparing yourself for this journey, there's so much to do in terms of preparing for death, really, because you're advised to tie up your affairs before you go, and to settle any outstanding issues. And that in itself really gets you into a space that's really quite reflective and that puts your life in context. But the thing that I remember that really opened my heart was the labbaik, learning the labbaik, Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika laka labbaik, innal hamda wa ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lak. And even now when I hear that, it just, it's full of anticipation, it's full of nearness to God, it's full of wanting to be present and wanting to be close to Him and in His home. And then I think other things that really helped me before I went was a piece of advice that somebody gave us, because you see, once you start telling people you're about to go on Hajj, you start hearing these incredible stories and people who've gone in unexpected circumstances and who've had incredible experiences, and it opens up this world to you. And I remember the best piece of advice we got was somebody who said, if you're going on the Hajj, then you've been invited. And you have to accept that if you've been invited by God, just remember He will take care of everything. So there'll be a lot to do, but don't try to push anything, and trust that He will enable you to complete what needs to be completed. And that advice really stood us in good stead, because actually Hajj is one of the toughest things I've ever done. It's really quite an assault course, and there's so much to do, and there's so much to process, and physically, emotionally, spiritually, it's really challenging. I guess the kind of key, and I'm just going to mention the key kind of learning points, I guess, for me. The first one was patience, because as soon as we arrived at the Hajj terminal, I think we arrived at something like 1 o'clock in the morning, and we were with a group. We didn't know the people in the group beforehand, but as soon as we'd cleared through immigration, we were told that our bus was in a certain place, and everybody went rushing towards the bus. And we got on and we were still sat there 8 hours later without having moved. And every group that you saw would do the same thing. They would arrive and they'd rush to their transport only to be sat there for a really long time. So Hajj really, I mean, it's the biggest test of your impatience. And then there's all the group dynamics. And I actually think there's a lot to learn, like Fuaad said, from actually encountering all those people in their incredible diversity. There's the group that you're with, so I was with my family, and then there's the Hajj group in itself, which poses all these challenges, and I don't know anybody who hasn't had problems with their Hajj group or the way things have been organised. But you have to work together, because actually you're in this together, and that in itself is a really important learning point, actually, that we're all in this together. And you really see that when you see people from all over the world, and all of what you end up encountering. As soon as we got there, we also lost our mum. So as soon as we arrived, she decided to go and look for somebody she knew in a hotel, and she never found her way back. So, you know, that also, we were so helpless because we didn't even know where to start looking for her, but you know, we had to just be patient and wait that she'd find her way back, because the only thing she had was a wristband that tells you which maulam you're connected to, and then hope you find your way back. And then there was like the moment of kind of preparation of entering the haram and seeing the Kaaba. And I hadn't done Umrah or anything before, but I knew that was going to be a big moment, and I had thought about what would I want to say, you know, and people had said the first dua you say when you're there is what's accepted, you know, that moment, that momentary encounter is so vital. And I just remember seeing the Kaaba, and what came out wasn't actually what I anticipated, but actually it's what stayed with me most of my life is, you know, the prayer that came out was, you know, give me the capacity to love you and to love your creation. And in Hajj, you really get exposed to his creation, all of the shades, the good, the bad, you know, the angelic, the demonic, it's all there. I mean, I'd made the mistake of thinking when I went there that on Hajj everybody's on their best behaviour, but actually you see all sorts of things, and as Fuaad said, you have to encounter the toilets, which is an experience in itself that I'm not going to go into. But the Hajj rituals, you know, they're reenactments actually of the stories of the prophets. And that in itself is very significant. That's why I think the place is significant. I think in a way you have to make the journey to that place because it's primordial, it's a place that connects you to the stories of the prophets, and it's something that's been reenacted by your forefathers and forefathers before them and by the Muslim Ummah. So we arrived in Mina the night before Arafat, and you know, even in that there was what was interesting was, of course, like in most groups, the imam was a man, and so the men were in one tent and the women were in another tent. And I remember, you know, really wanting to know what we were going to do the next day and what the rituals were and how we should approach them. And what I found was I didn't have access to the imam because he was in the men's tent. And you know, that really troubled me because I wanted to know, and I didn't feel like I had a way of finding out. So I had arranged to meet with my brother later. They were having a talk by the imam, and I'd arranged to meet with him later. And I kept trying to get someone to go into the tent and ask my brother to come out, and also so I could say to him, look, can you ask the imam if he can talk to us women too? And I managed to get my brother's attention, and he came out and he said, look, I can't talk to you now, we're in the middle of discussing all of this. And so I kind of waited a bit longer, and then I sent somebody else in. And eventually my brother came out and he said, it was an interesting lesson about gender dynamics, because he said, you know, the imam had been talking to them about what to do the next day, and the men had got into a conversation. And one of the things that had come up in the conversation was that my brother said he had found it incredible that in the haram, men and women pray next to each other in ihram. And he had raised that with the imam, saying he had found that a really moving and incredible experience. And it had led to a conversation with the imam saying, yeah, it's okay here, but it can't happen in other places. And what had happened is it got into a conversation about women, which had deteriorated into why you can't pray next to women, or you know, why there has to be this separation. And then my brother had gone in and said to the imam, well, actually, you know, my sister's outside and she wants to know what we're doing tomorrow. And you know, the imam, it had brought them back as a group to realizing that actually we were together on this Hajj. It wasn't just the men. And the imam actually came out and apologized to me and said, okay, you know, this is what's going to happen. And, you know, it made me realize that for me, Hajj is really about unity. But there are so many moments when it's easy to fall into kind of dualities. And actually what happens is when men talk to men and women talk to women, it's so easy to start making assumptions about the other. And then actually, when we perform that Hajj, all of us are connected in that experience because we're all performing the same acts. And Ihram really symbolizes that because you're really down to your basics. I mean, there's no way of telling who's rich and who's poor, and you're in your simplest state. There's no trappings left. It's a very humbling experience, actually. You know, to not even, you know, to not have anything that symbolizes or signifies the way you want to present yourself in life. And then the day of Arafat, which is actually the essential part of Hajj. You know, all you have to do is be at Arafat, really. And then when we got to Arafat, it was like, oh, what do we do now? Because it's a really strange thing, because actually you're just there. And there are people from many different countries, and as you walk around the different camps, you really get the flavors of people from different cultures who respond to that really differently. And I remember sitting there, and I knew I needed to do dua and pray, but it was so hot, it was really hard to stay focused. But you do, you know, you do the calling out in the best way you can, and really it's a plane of forgiveness. You know, it's a plane of reflecting on your life and asking for forgiveness, and it's also the place of unification between Adam and Eve. So I think what symbolized it for me was that towards the end of the day, as the sun started setting and you start realizing you're running out of time, I remember seeing this man who was just, I mean, he was pouring his heart out and he was crying and praying to his Lord, and just seeing that, it just made me see that actually that's what this life on earth is like. We're here for such a short while, and you can easily lose concentration, you know, you can not stay focused, but really when the moment comes, all you can ask for is for forgiveness and nearness to your Lord. And then I've just got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to be quick. So Muzdalifah, you know, you enter this valley the night after that and you sleep on the rough ground. There's no covering. You're under the stars and you're amongst a sea of people all, you know, covered in white. And it was the best night's sleep I had on the whole trip. It was incredible. And then there comes, you know, the day when you start, and I'll say something about this, about the stoning of the Jamarat, because immediately the next morning as we were making our way back to Mina, something started changing. Because there was a coach system that was coming and it was taking people back to Mina, and then they were going to go and stone the Jamarat. And you see, that ritual of stoning the Jamarat, I think really we externalize it, but actually it brings up stuff in us. And what happened was the coach system started breaking down. It started not running to time, and then there weren't enough coaches, and there was just mayhem. And when you're amongst millions of people, there's really, I mean, it felt like there might be a stampede. And once the system had started breaking down, everybody started trying to do what they could do for themselves. Everybody was in it for themselves. And for a while, people started saying, no, let the older people go first, or the younger babies or kids, and the other people can walk if they have to. But once the system broke down, it was just mayhem. Everybody was trying to stop the coaches, taking the coach driver off the coaches, taking over the coaches just so they could take care of themselves. And I remember me and my family were a bit kind of stuck. We were didn't know what to do, and we tried to cross country and get to a coach that seemed like it had space, and we tried to stop the coach and hail it down. And they stopped, and the guy opened and said, there's no space, this is just for Turks. And I remember my heart sinking, but you see, that's what had happened, is that as soon as everybody started looking after themselves and their own, it had really broken down along ethnic lines or group lines. And then the whole stoning of the Jamarat was such an experience in that, because everybody's so anxious about the stoning and what they've heard about stampedes, that when we got back to Mina, our group started making this elaborate plan about how they were going to protect the group and how we should go together. And what we would do is the women would be in the middle and the men would be in a circle around them holding hands, and we would all go together to the Jamarat. And although it seemed well-intentioned, I realized when we did it that although we protected our group, it meant anybody who was in the way got knocked out, because everybody was too busy holding each other's hands and wanting to stick together. And so the next day we decided we would just go in as a family. My brother would go first and we would go in a single line behind him, and it was actually very easy. So I think for me there was a learning in that about what happens in groups, you know, how when you look after your own, you can really end up damaging and hurting other people along the way. So just to kind of finish off, I mean, those are some of the, just two little quick points actually. You know, there's the tawaf, obviously, you're circling the Kaaba, and anybody who's had experience of that will just know how incredible that is to be in a sea of people who are moving together. And then the kind of final point I want to make is really about Safa and Marwa, which I think is really significant, the same, because, you know, it really struck me that doing the say was really performing the ritual around Hajj. And that was a surprise to me. It was a surprise to me that one of the most significant rituals in Hajj is actually connecting with Hajar, who was a woman, who was abandoned by Abraham, or left, not abandoned, but left in the desert. It must have felt like being abandoned. And also that actually when we're in the Haram, we're actually in her home. You know, that's where she was. And that was very significant to really try and connect with her. And I think all of those rituals are about connecting with the prophets. None of them are actually about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, for me, I felt him when I went to Medina. But the Hajj is so significant for Muslims because it's a reenactment of all of what we're taught in the Quran. It's an opportunity to reconnect with our ancestors. It's an opportunity to reconnect with those human experiences and those levels of consciousness. It can become an empty ritual, and I think there's plenty of people who do it just to kind of perform the ritual. But if you can, and I think this is the key point, if you can stay connected to the inner journey, then actually the Hajj, of course there's all the distractions with all the high towers and the glitzy restaurants and all of that. But actually they're just distractions. If you can stay connected to that inner journey, then really, by the end of it, all of what I wanted was nearness to God. You know, you realize that all you want to do is to be in that state of faith, you know, inshallah. I'm a -1.
Thank you, Rabia, for a really touching and moving reflection on Hajj. Now for our final speaker. Sorry, if you stay with me. Our final speaker is Sid Djerfi. Sid trained as an information systems engineer, then attained an MSc in business system analysis and design. Following that, he taught ICT for 2 years in a secondary school in London as a participant in the Teach First programme, and then worked in an international education NGO, working to expand education opportunities for children. He currently works as a management consultant for Bain & Company. Sid also joined the City Circle in 2006 as teacher at the Saturday School. He was then asked to lead the school, and following that he became chair of the City Circle for a short period. I think he went on Hajj 4 years ago, was it?
It's going to be very tough to go after Fuaad and Rabia and I'd possibly repeat a few of the things they said. I'll try to sort of follow how sort of Hajj works for some of you who haven't, and then as I sort of talk through that, pick on certain points from just totally personal reflections. But you know, given that I sort of trained as an engineer and work as a consultant, I obviously maybe pay more attention to the logistical methods more than spiritual ones. So Hajj started for me when I was working from home on Friday. It was Ramadan, so a couple of months before Hajj. Just usually when people are sort of setting up to go on Hajj. And it's sort of, I wasn't thinking about Hajj or anything, but I had thoughts about it before. But it was sort of, I described it as sort of like a text message that arrived, and I just had this thought. I literally was working on some spreadsheets, and I had this thought that I should go on Hajj. You know, an hour later, I was at Jummah, I wanted a friend of mine who runs he was a Hajj operator, and I said, Abraham, I said, I'm going to be coming with you on Hajj. He said, fine. Yeah, by the Tuesday after, I went and got my, my jabs for the meningitis. On Friday, I went and paid, and that was it. I was ready. He gave me an ihram and 10 liters of Zamzam, and I was ready to go. And sort of for the next 2 months, I really stressed about things happening that would stop me from getting ill and all that sort of stuff. And I traveled quite a bit, and I was working for an international NGO, so I was in and out of the Middle East quite often. But all of a sudden, I worried about planes falling and all those things, because I was worried about something that would stop me from doing this. And my first reflection on this is sort of the, as Rabia is saying, we grew up being told that Hajj is a thing you do when you're old. I mean, even the expression, Haji is, something that's related to an old person. After I finished Hajj, I even had sort of this silly joke with my family that, you say, we're not going to do anything until the Haji arrives. And, I turned up, as a 30-year-old, and they expecting this old man. And I think the first reflection for us in that is how we sort of disentangle what's cultural in our community from what's religious. And religion is very straightforward. It says, if you have the money and the health, if you have $5 grand, I know it's a bit of money, but for a lot of people, it's quite affordable. And then, you're healthy enough, you should go and book a ticket. It's really that straightforward. But we confuse it so much into the stuff that, our ancestors tell us. And so I think that's the first one, and it could, kind of go into all of the things where we confuse culture with what religion tells us. But I think that was, for me, the first lesson is the purity of Islam is one of them is that. When people say you reach a certain age, you pray, you reach a certain age, you pray. You reach a certain age, you do your Ramadan, you don't say, no, I'm not 80, I'm only 17, and I will always be as that, that Norishini answer. No, you just go. And so that's the first thing for me to you is, if you have the 4 or 5 grand and you're healthy enough, you should go and speak to an operator. And in choosing operators, obviously, it's another big thing, because if you choose the wrong one, you're going to end up having to sort of exercise your patience a lot more than with others. And I was very lucky. I'm not going to make a plug for anyone, but we ended up with a very good operator who knew exactly what to do. Till the small things about how when we did the Jamarat, they would have a scout that would go ahead of us, and then when he sees that there's an opening, he would give us a signal, and we would go in, we wouldn't have to bump into anyone else. They were that organized. We got 2 postcards that you can send home, and they had a little post box in the hotel where you can just post your letters, and they would just send them, they would take care of it. So those things matter a lot, and regardless of how good the operator is, you're going to have problems. But it's good to have a really good one. And I think there's a website that sort of tells people on how to, it's called My Hajj Rating or something. We got to the airport, and like I said, I've traveled quite a bit, but for once I went to the airport, I think 5 hours early, which, people don't do anymore, even now it's I go half an hour before the plane takes off, and then, you go straight in. But I think I was just so anxious, I went in really early, and I was lucky that I met this old Scottish man. He was disabled, and he was coming with us on Hajj. And he told me he had just converted about 4 years earlier, but his first experience of Islam was, I think it was 73, where he had been to Algiers and he had the Adhan. And the Adhan stuck in his head for about 30, 40 years. And one day he just decided that was the thing for him, and he became Muslim. And that was really touching, and we had a very good breakfast, and we became friends till we got there. And there's a lot of camaraderie in Hajj. And you learn a lot about that from lots of people. And then, we got there, we were stopped in Istanbul, we changed into our ihrams there, and one of the biggest stresses is this thing going to come off, right? It's just still, and so people give you tricks on how to make sure. Within a day of Hajj, it actually becomes very simple. You can easily learn how to wrap it, and it doesn't come off, and it's quite easy, but I did stress over that for about 48 hours. The harder bit was sort of the top bit, because you don't know what to do with it, it's too long and all of that. And so that was we got there, so then we took off on the next flight, and then we were now on our way to Jeddah, and you come to the Miqat, and you do the niyyah together. So unlike sort of in prayer where you don't have to say it out loud, and we had a mix of people on the flight, somebody, the imam would go, the different imams would go onto the mic and they would say, you know, they make these announcements of like, all right, now we say the niyyah together, and you start saying the niyyah together, which is in itself powerful, because now you realize, now you're getting into the miqat, you're a couple of miles from the miqat, which is the point, there's a circle around sort of Mecca, as which you're within sort of the holy sites, that you realize that I am now actually a pilgrim. You get to Mecca, you do the Umrah, which is basically you do the tawaf, you do the 7 tawaf, then you stop, you do 2 rak'ahs at Maqam Ibrahim, and sort of like Rabia was saying, sort of it's all about Hajj. You also realize, like, I came back thinking that Ibrahim is like quite a big influence in our lives. You know, you're standing there and you're thinking, Sayyidina Ibrahim used to stand there and, you know, look whether this Kaaba is sort of built right or not. I mean, it's like there. You know, it's, you know. And then I just thought one of the things that was going through my head is sort of people were stamping on my head because it's so crowded. And then you go and you drink from Zamzam, then you do the Safa and Marwa, so you do seven times. And I had exactly the same sort of experience that Rabia had. I stood there, and then the verse, you know, the Quran that it talks about when Sayyidina Ibrahim says, you know, and I've left my offspring in a land of sort of no growth and no zara, and you know, and you think about why he did that. First of all, you know, because it's God told him to do so, and that becomes at the end the conclusion of Hajj for me. But also the fact that Hajj was sitting there with her baby in the middle of a desert. I mean, now you can go to Starbucks and the mall, and you know, there's a Debenhams and all of those things. But you know, if you can think like, it's true, that's the reality. I went to Starbucks quite a few times. But you know, when you think about it, this woman was standing there with her baby, with, you know, no water, nothing. And it's quite a moving experience. It really is. Like, to think that's what she went. Like, you're standing where she was, and when you're running, you're thinking Hajj was doing this run, and it's quite incredible. And so a lot of it is sort of reminded of all of these things that happened before. And then after the Umrah, sort of you go and you get sort of your hair shaved or cut, and then that's it. You can come off the ihram. You can be in your jeans or whatever, and then you can walk around comfortably. And then you have time to go around, and then do pretty much whatever you want until the day before Hajj. And then the day before Hajj is the day you go to Mina, and then we went to Mina, spent the night in Mina. And the first thing that really hit me about Mina was just, I mean, you see this in Mecca too, but just how dirty Mina is. I mean, I have these pictures, I didn't want to bring today, but I have pictures of like mountains of like all the rubbish from Mina, from the camps, because they just would not clean it up. And excuse the comparison, but I think the Ramadan right after, I remember having iftar at one of my friends near Notting Hill, and it was the time of the carnival. So I went in as the carnival was in full swing. I came out after iftar 2-3 hours later, and a lot of the streets were clean, you know. And I'm really sad that that's the comparison I make, but it really is a reality. And I recently had the chance to meet one of the guys who runs one of the operations in Mecca, and there are a lot of these excuses about the number of people or where the people come from, and you know, we've seen the Olympics here, we've seen the World Cups in other countries, and I think there is a way we can solve a lot of these problems. And the most disappointing thing, and this is the thing that I found quite sad, is people often didn't tell us this. I sat there saying to people, tell us that Mecca is like this, that when I go, it's going to be dirty. And, you know, that Mina is going to be so messy. Because then I could have been a bit more patient, I think, if my expectations were right. And I find that very sad, but I have to move on to the next bits. Then we went to Arafat, and again in Arafat, you're just sitting there for the day, making your supplications, you know, drinking water for the whole day because you're standing in 40-degree heat, and, you know, there's nothing to do. What you do there is to pray. Then the following day, you go and do the Jamarat, and there are a lot of these things that you do, and a lot of people ask the questions. And the biggest question and the biggest debate we had there was, where is the spirituality? Because we were waiting for this serene moment where like something is going to hit you, and it didn't. And a lot of us really had hours and hours of debates with the imams about when is it going to hit us. And it didn't. It really didn't. I think it only did when we eventually realized that at the end of the day, all the stuff you do, you can't rationalize it. All it is that, you know, one of my favorite verses of the Quran is when Allah talks to Ibrahim and says, إِذْ قَالَ لَهُ رَبُّهُ أَسْلِمْ قَالَ أَسْلَمْتُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. God says to him, you know, be a Muslim, you know, submit to me. And he says, I submit. And I think for me, that was one of the biggest lessons of Hajj, is that you do what you are told, and that is the ultimate act of submission. I'll conclude on my last evening in in Mecca, I went to do my final sort of tawaf and then do Safa and Marwa, and I was on the top floor. It's a beautiful evening. It was sort of a bit quieter because a lot of people had done tawaf and ifad already. And excuse this bit, there's a gentleman spat in the haram, and I was like, "What are you doing? Like, do you realize the Kaaba? You can see it. Like, you literally can see it." I saw somebody do it in Medina too, and I had to remind him that the Prophet ﷺ was buried 50 meters away or less. And in there's a reflection about the state of the Ummah, that as I walked to the Haram on that very last day, I remember very vividly that I was so sad that I started tearing up. And I don't usually get emotional about things. I was really tearing up. And then all of a sudden, I had this moment of sort of peace, because I felt that maybe solving some of these problems has to come from people who are in the West, like people like us, who have sort of the benefit of having access to Islam, but also to sort of the knowledge and all of the other things that would allow us to hopefully address some of these issues. And ultimately, we can only solve these issues if we can solve them within ourselves, and that's what sort of Hajj teaches us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sid. So we'll now go to all our speakers. I'd like to now open the question and answer session to the floor. There is a roaming mic, so if you just put up your hands, and then Ruxana will bring the mic around. Yeah, the gentleman in the blue shirt is back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've been to Mecca several times. I think the problem that people don't realize the significance of the city and of this land is that there's so many traditions and so many things being mentioned in the Quran related to it that gives it significance. For example, it's the first place of worship being put for the entire mankind. And there's also, we've got all tradition that all prophets from Abraham even to Moses, they've been there. And some people say that Jerusalem itself, which is the Balad al-Amin, is actually Mecca. And people would say, no, Jerusalem is in Palestine. But the thing is, when you look at the Quran, the holy place and the most significant place in the world, according to Muslim, is Mecca. And it's the other thing is that, also when I read the Sultan Nam, is that when Moses asked was being told that probably forgot the prophet, he said that it's actually he told him that I'm going to let you marry one of my daughters if you're going to perform tamaniya hijr. The word hijr is from Hajj. So the prophet Moses, peace be upon him, was actually seems to be that he was also there. What I'm saying is that so many people, scholars, are actually not aware of trying to tell us the importance of that place. That all prophets, right from Adam to the prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, including Prophet Moses, the great Prophet Moses himself, that he was there.
Thank you for your comment. Do you have a question?
The question is, when you go to Mecca, the question is why are people, especially the so-called scholars there, are actually telling or informing people about these significant and important things mentioned in the Quran about Mecca? Thank you very much.
Why are they not mentioning
Yeah,
these
also
things?
the word Mecca, which is actually mentioned several times, Mecca, okay, it's also mentioned in the Bible.
Okay, well, we just need to move on to more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can the lady know?
I'll make a...
Hello? Yeah. I think all of you talked about your difficulties of reconciling the spirituality with the reality. And Sid, you said that maybe it's something that we can do in the West. I mean, I don't think it's a Western thing. I think it's for us as a global almost to think about that. But I think we can only do what's in our hands, really, what we are personally able to do. So possibly, it's something that we should be making more demands on our Hajj, there's a committee, there's a national committee, I don't know much about it. Those committees to say, I mean, apparently Singapore, you have to be trained. You go on a training course before. And there are other countries which are much more organized, like Turkey and other places that you have to, even if you come from a rural village or something, you have to be able to go and be prepared as much as possible to have adab and knowledge, you know. So if we can only, as a country here, be sure that our people who go for Hajj do the best that they can do and make a contribution. So this is something that we should be able to try and do here. So whatever suggestions people have on that respect would be welcome.
We'll take one more, the lady in the break, please.
Yes, I'd like to echo that. I think that it can be very confusing going on Hajj because there's so many bits and you don't get the essence. The point of Hajj is dedication. You bring nothing to Hajj but intention. And on Arafah, you are dedicating yourself to Allah. You are nothing. You're bringing the pathetic thing that you are to Him. Your Hajj is the rest of your life. You don't need to go again, except unless you're invited. And sometimes, because we haven't done it right, Allah invites us several times, inshallah. But Hajj is the rest of our lives. And that's why, when we hear that it's Arafah Day, we must re-challenge what that dedication meant and what are we doing about it in our day-to-day lives. If otherwise it was pillow talk and it meant nothing. And you have to be very careful to know the difference between being a Hajj tourist and a Haji. And the difference is every day, here and now, non-stop.
Thank you for that very significant observation. Actually, you picked up on the tourist issue. If speakers could pick up on those questions about why the scholars are not reminding Hajj goers of the history and significance of the place, also about preparation, and also I like the comment that you alluded to about Hajj tourists.
Briefly, you're absolutely right. It is a reenactment of the stories of a lot of the prophets, from Adam to Abraham to Hajar, and the fact that the prophet performed that Hajj too. So I don't know about the details of other prophets and whether they were there or not, but I think it should be a place that reminds us of the stories of the prophets. And when I hear about, for example, the Saudis wanting to move the prophet's tomb, which I think if they try and do, there should be an outcry about, because you see, it's not about worshipping the people who are buried there. The thing is, the prophets were sent as messengers because they are conduits between us and God, in a sense. They are human embodiments of those who came near to God. And so for us, it really helps us to have those human experiences and stories to help us to connect to the majesty of God. If you've gone there, you know that in the Haram, you really, when you see the Kaaba, you feel the majesty of God. But when you go to Medina, you feel the Jamal and the Rahmah of the Prophet and of God through him. So really, those human aspects are very vital to us. And when we perform the rituals of those prophets, they also connect us to human experience. What is it to build the house of God? What was Adam and Abraham building? And what does that symbolize for us? What is it for that house to be empty? What is it to do tawaf around the Kaaba? What is it to do to do the patience and the perseverance and to have faith and to find Zamzam? These are all inner questions that should be raised for us when we try to connect to those experiences. And so, actually, I'm really glad you raised that, because I think, we kind of go at it as Muslims with a capital M, and we think we know because we know about the Prophet. But actually, Islam, more than any religion, has the capacity to integrate all of the other prophets and the other religions. And the fact that Hajj is not primarily about the Prophet's life, but about Abraham and Hajar and Adam, is actually really significant in itself, because we're going back to something that goes before even the Prophet. And he says that. He says, I came with the religion of Abraham. So I think, yeah, I wish scholars would do that, because I think it would help people really prepare and connect to something that goes beyond what we think we already know, you know? And to human experiences that are really vital. We're asked deliberately to perform those again and again, those particular experiences. And then, yeah, I mean, I think Humera's right. I mean, I wonder, yeah, why didn't I, or why don't we make more demands or ask of what we need in Hajj? You know, where are the avenues through which to ask for the changes that we need? And as you said, I mean, it's a commitment, actually. And so it is really important to engage with that in an active way and to know what the avenues are. And I think, you know, always people are thinking about, whenever they come back, everybody's preoccupied, and you know, even the Saudis are constantly trying to think how to make this more workable, because it's a logistical nightmare to deal with so many people. But you know, I kind of came to the conclusion when I was there that there's something about the simplicity and about the messiness which is actually what teaches you the most in a way. You know, it's when you're in Mina and it's really uncomfortable in the tent or something, that you also get faced with something in yourself that you have to deal with. Or, you know, when things didn't work out in the group, or, you know, all of those kinds of things expose you to enough stuff that needs working on. And that, for me, is a large part of the Hajj, is to confront your own nafs, actually. And in fact, if Hajj does anything, is it exposes you to yourself and it exposes other people to you, because really, you're pretty naked in front of God when you're on the Hajj. There's no way of dressing up or hiding, you know, your own behavior and what comes out of you as well as what comes out of other people. So things become very clear, actually. And some of it, you know, happens because of the messiness, and some of it, I think you're absolutely right, there's more we could do about. You know, we could actually try and push for changes and suggestions. And I don't envy the Saudis. I think they have a horrendous task, really, to deal with. But I think practical suggestions and stuff, if there's a way of feeding those into the system, would be really valuable. And you actually don't need a lot. If anything, I think all this, you know, all these developments are so unnecessary, actually, most of them, because really what it's about is really going back to basics. You know, you don't actually need a lot. I mean, I even after staying in Mina in the tents, I actually thought, I wish I could go on Hajj and do what some people did, which was sleep in the open air. Because I think that connects you to your maker in a different way too. So a lot of that stuff, I think, is distractions, but we need to think about how it works so that it doesn't become a hindrance, you know, to a spiritual experience.
So maybe the dirty toilets and the mountains of rubbish are a good thing to test your nafs?
Well, you know, not necessarily. I don't think we should excuse them or dismiss them. But I also think, you know, because life isn't perfect, people aren't perfect, we have to deal with what comes up, but that doesn't mean we have to ignore it. We should try and do, like in life, we try and do the best we can do about those kinds of situations.
Hajj is, each of the pillars is unique. Once, when I was in Hajj, a Sufi sheikh who came from Horn of Africa, I think it was Eritrea. I remember attending das, and he was saying, it was a favor saying to say that fasting in Islam, Allah says, fasting is for me. And I'm the one who rewards it. The Sufi sheikh said, Hajj is for you, the Hajj. Because the principle about Hajj, that it is the best day, Yom Arafah. Why? They say Allah opens all the 70,000 doors to heaven. This is the day for you now to take that opportunity, to cleanse. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is taught that you do a perfect Hajj, you are cleansed of your sins, like the day you were born. So this is, like Rabia said, the Arafah is the day, and you can feel, I mean, I definitely felt. There are strange things. I've gone with some people from the West, and when you enter the Kaaba region, you start saying, tell me what should I feel? I mean, it's individualistic what you're going to feel about. You see, I'm Shafi. And the first thing that I realized when I'm going with the Malikis when they're within the Kaaba, they lower their gaze. In their madhab, they're not allowed to look directly in the majesty of the house of God. So like Sister Dr. Amina says, people go with this, their madhabs, their rituals, but you know, the inner pure is the fitra. That you go there, you're going, the indication right from the beginning, the whole episode about Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik, is that you are, they call you Dawfullah, you are the guest of God. You only go there, believe me, because Allah wants you and He invited you. So just imagine once you leave your journey that you are going to the house of God, how would you feel in your tune if you knew? Just change your mind and from the moment you leave, I'm going. Say today, we were talking to somebody today in the morning, you got invited to Buckingham Palace and you had 2 weeks. You'll be thinking how you're going to go, isn't it? What I'm going to wear, what time I have to be there, you know, I need to have 15 minutes. This is exactly the situation. The issue about the difficulties about it is a test.